Please welcome Uchita Vaid, who is an assistant professor of design studies in the School of Human Ecology. Vaid's scholarship seeks to understand the role of the built environment and design in improving the human condition. Dr. Vaid investigates interaction between design, human behavior, and health, with the goal to create healthy, supportive, and equitable environments for living, working, and playing. Human health and well-being are linked with our physical as well as our socio-cultural environmental factors. Dr. Vaid is interested in understanding these complex connections to enable the use of evidence-based design principles within our built environments, especially in environments of crisis. Her work underscores how design can be used as a transformational force to address health and social vulnerabilities, particularly in global low to middle income contexts.
That's helpful. Thank you. Because I think our bodies really speak a whole lot, right? If you don't see a person's body, you don't know what they're talking about. So that's the idea. I really look at this deep connection between the built environments that we live in, we work in, we play in, and what is that connection to women's health and well-being, right? Do the built environments that we live in have an impact on our health and well-being? So that's the perspective that I take on understanding how do we improve people's health and well-being. And the way I look through this connection is actually looking at environments of crisis. So these are environments where either women have undergone a crisis, or these are environments that they interact with after they've encountered a crisis, right? So to give you examples, refugee centers, refugee housing is one example like that, right? Homeless shelters, thinking about people who are living on the pavements, right? Pavement dwellings are an environment of crisis. And you can think of many other environments of crisis, and I would argue we are getting more and more environments like that. The level of crisis is increasing in the world. So that's my argument. I want to look through built environment in these environments of crisis. So today I want to focus on a specific environment of crisis in some ways, which looks at urban poor settlements, or quote unquote slums. Not the best word to kind of use here, but that's a debate for another day, right? So throughout this talk, I'm going to use either informal settlements or slums to address this idea of urban poor settlements, right? So the specific case that I want to focus on today is this case study in India, in western part of India, in the state of Gujarat and the city of Ahmedabad. A recent housing policy that they've implemented is something called an in-situ redevelopment policy. So what this housing policy actually does, it goes into these informal housing settlements, right? The one that you see on the left in 2012 is a housing settlement. And in 2018, this is the same housing settlement now redeveloped at the same site. So the same people still live there, but now in a very different kind of house, right? Now they are apartment-style housing, 4-story walk-ups, versus an informal community that had kind of semi-permanent housing situations in some ways, no tenure rights, stuff like that. So I'm going to be looking at this specific case. So if you look through that community, the top left image in 2012, that's what the community looked like, right? These are Google Earth images. So the 2012 image shows you a very organic settlement that developed over time. In 2014, that was completely demolished. And in 2018, these buildings were built up there for the people who already lived there, right? So they came back and now started living in these apartment-style housing. So that brings up a very important question. Before I go on to the question, these are some images that give you a little bit of a snapshot. So in the slum housing, often a large family lived in a single multi-purpose room where you're sleeping in the same space, cooking in the same place, working there, etc. Versus a redeveloped housing, you had separate rooms. So you had a separate kitchen, a separate bathroom, a separate living room, and a separate bedroom, right? So that's kind of the change that is happening. So that brings us to the question, what happens when people move from this one kind of a living situation to a very different kind of living situation, but the same people? And that's exactly what I began to kind of think about. How do people's physical environments change as they move from this one housing to the other? How do their health environments change? And what happens to their social environments, right? As they move from this slum community to a low-rise public housing community. So today I'll focus mostly on kind of the social aspect of what happens to the social cultural lives of women as their built environment changes. So I'm not, without going into much detail or the methodology of this, I've done kind of mixed methods work that looks at women's experiences in both of these built environments. And what women tend to bring about is this key idea that the built form in these informal communities provided them with some kind of affordances, provided them with some kind of opportunities to engage in social cultural life, which is taken away from them as they move to the redeveloped settlements, right? So I'll share a few ideas here. The first idea that women often talk about, this is the idea of interstitial space, right? So what do we really mean when we say that? So if you look through the map on the top left, you see that there is a hierarchy of space in an informal settlement. There is private space, which is women's individual homes, right? That's private space. However, outside those individual homes, there are these narrow alleyways that occur because of the organic development of the settlement. And these narrow alleyways are actually a very important part of women's everyday lives. They serve as an extension to the home. These are the spaces where women actually interact with each other, these semi-private spaces. And women really use them to engage with other women, to engage in social life, to engage in play. Even kind of everyday activities would happen within these interstitial spaces. While you're kind of chopping up vegetables, sitting with your friends, you're also keeping an eye on your children who are playing in the same alleyway, right? So there is a very deep sense of connection between people who live within that alleyway. There is a sense of community there, that this is a space that belongs to us, right? So there is a sense of ownership. However, when you go to redeveloped settlements, so it's the same people in a different environment, we see that semi-private space is completely designed out of these settlements. There is either just private space, women's apartments, right, the family's apartments, or these large-scale open spaces below the apartments, which women often talk about this idea that it is not culturally appropriate to hang out in these spaces. It is not safe to hang out in these spaces, even though, to remind you, it's the same people, right? So now there are questions of safety, there are questions of cultural appropriateness, so that makes us wonder, how do we as designers, how do we as policymakers think about gendered spaces? Spaces that women own, spaces that women feel like they can control, and spaces that they feel where they can connect with other people in their community. Because social networks in these communities are often incredibly important. Women have reported lower food insecurity after they've moved to a redeveloped settlement with the same income level. Women have reported more social isolation. Women have reported more domestic violence with the same community, the same place, right? So thinking about this change in the design of our environments is a really critical issue. To make sure I'm not running over time, I'm just going to quickly talk about adaptability. Women talk about this idea that economic security is very much associated with their built environment. In the informal communities, they are quickly able to adapt a part of their house if they need to start a small business, versus in the redeveloped communities, there was no allowance for that, right? There is a lot more work behind that, but I'm going to kind of pause here with the adaptability. But the key argument that I'm trying to make is this idea that in urban policy making, in housing policy making, we don't have women's voices that to the tune that we need them to be, right? How are women actually experiencing these changes is an incredible issue for us to be thinking about, both as designers, built environment researchers, and policymakers. So kind of documenting women's experience over time about these policies is a critical issue that impacts not just their health and well-being, but kind of largely the society's health and well-being, right? I've done some work on young women, so girls kind of ranging from 11-year-old to 17-year-olds, and thinking about what is the impact of redevelopment on that group of population, which nobody's really talking about, right? What does their development look like in an informal community versus a redeveloped community? So that's kind of work in progress at this point, but I'll stop here and say thank you to Lori for W again, and thank you to all the women who've fed me, helped me throughout my field work. So yeah, thank you. I'll pause here. Thanks very much.
Thank you for supporting the 4W initiative. The 4W Fall Forum and Social is a change-making platform to bring people together on pressing issues around gender and well-being, and also cultivate leadership and community among scholars and students. The event commemorates the 175th anniversary of the University of Wisconsin-Madison, as it highlights past and current scholarships related to gender and well-being. Connecting the vibrant history with the present, we will feature early career UW faculty to share their work with the audience through a half-day forum that includes flash talks, interactive sessions, and a networking reception.